He's so nice. He's joining me twice. Cole Jacobson, researcher for the Buffalo Bills, is back here, but this time he is here to talk college football. And specifically, Cole, I want to talk about the Heisman race because we got a couple Saturdays left before the invites go out to New York. And Indiana's Fernando Mendoza, without having played a game last weekend, may have the quote unquote easiest path to the award, may have the most publicity right now as far as winning the honor. And at 6'5", 225 pounds, 31 games under his belt with the Hoosiers and Cal Bears. I'm curious, when you watch him play, what stands out to you?
Yeah, it's really, I think that competitiveness, that's what you want in your quarterback at any age level. Pop Warner to pros, just someone who never quits on a game. And I think both for better and worse, he's been in more situations where he needs to show that competitiveness than someone like Julian Sayin, where they have the best team and they've never really been stressed out this year, except maybe the Texas game at the end, you could argue. But yeah, I think Mendoza just showing that ability to kind of will them out of situations that look pretty tough and always compete, find a way to come out on top. And that's why they're number two in the country, 11-0. So it's fun to see him ball out in situations like that.
He has so many different answers to me, and I think that's one of the reasons that he really does separate himself from everyone else. 3.5 yards per rush attempt with 5 scores certainly establishes the high floor where even if things are falling apart around him, he's not going to make mistakes or completely fall apart with the rest of the team in that situation. Game-winning drive at Penn State, that's his Heisman moment. Certainly Gus Johnson on the call aided in making that highlight reel, so to speak. Precision for him is uncanny. IQ off the charts. Was going to go to an Ivy League before the Cal Bears gave him an opportunity to succeed. And it's interesting, too, how transfers in college football, specifically at the quarterback position, sometimes they flounder, but sometimes they're acquiring all of this additional knowledge and all these different ideas to have answers to a bunch of different challenges and questions. And it does seem like he is the latter.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, a lot of these guys, especially nowadays, even before NIL era, they transfer for 1 year. You kind of feel like they're in it more for themselves than for the new school they're with. But it at least seems like to the outside world that Mendoza's really bought into this culture Signetti has with Indiana and hoping that school gets heights it never been before. I mean, last year we thought was kind of like their peak, like, oh, Indiana football is like 11-1, making the playoff, and now they're even better this year. So, I'm not in the locker room. I don't really know how he is behind closed doors, but at least to the common fan, it seems like he's totally bought in on being leader of that program and all about trying to help them reach new heights.
Being bought in is certainly one thing, but then also, too, it does seem like that he's willing to tailor his offense and adjust to the personnel. And I don't know how you feel about this kind of in general, but it seems to me like a lot of college football coaches, they have this kind of cookie cutter belief in terms of what the offense is supposed to look like. But with Signetti, there seems to be a great deal more flexibility. And to me, that's not only a good thing, but also it's a great thing in terms of Mendoza's Heisman campaign and maybe the next great quarterback that he gets with the Hoosiers, maybe they will have a great opportunity as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of coaching at any level. I mean, I saw myself coaching high school ball last year is that you got to be malleable and fit your personnel, what they're good at. You can't just say, we run my system, doesn't matter who the quarterback is, because, you could have the best athlete in the world back there. You could have a total statue back there. You got to adjust to what they're good at. And obviously, Sig has done that every step of his career so far. And that's why he wins. Google him.
Absolutely. I want to move on now to Ohio State. And at the start of the year, it was really receiver Jeremiah Smith getting all the Heisman attention in Columbus. But now with the emergence of Carnell Tate and others, now it's quarterback Julian Sayin who may have the best opportunity to put together that kind of best final two-game highlight reel, so to speak, of anyone in the field. Ohio State, number one passing attack per CFB-graphs. So given that sort of inevitable collision course that should happen in this Big Ten championship game between Ohio State and Indiana. Can you compare and contrast Sayin with Mendoza for me?
Yeah, and kind of as I alluded to earlier, I think, sort of what hurts Sayin and maybe some fans and media's eyes that he hasn't been in those like stressful situations where you need to come back in the second half. But I feel you shouldn't really fault him for that. Like, he's doing his job. He completes damn near 80% of his passes and they're winning all the time. That means you're doing something right. So I think you can't really penalize a guy for not having that, quote unquote Heisman moment just because they're always winning in the second half. They doesn't need to have that moment. So I think that's a difference between them. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing or a good thing. And, the race, like, you can't blame Sayin for not being in those tough late game situations. And yeah, I think there's no secret that, throwing to guys like Tate and Jeremiah Smith helps you. That's probably the best skill position out there in college football, but you still got to make the throws. At any age level, it doesn't matter who your teammates are. So the quarterback is always going to be about two things more than any other traits. It's about accuracy and decision making. And he's shown that both traits at a pretty incredible level for a kid who's, I believe, only a sophomore. So I think, that's why he's where he's at. And like, I know probably by Vegas lines, Mendoza's a heavy favorite by now. But realistically, I think that Big Ten championship, assuming that game does happen, obviously they both could slip up before then. But saying if they win or even if they don't win, but Stan really outplays Mendoza, this race is not over by any means. So I think Stan could easily go win this thing.
Yeah, it would be kind of strange if we get to the Big Ten championship game and the loser of that game winds up winning the Heisman. Lowest turnover worthy throw rate among the contenders at 1.2% per PFF. Highest grade of throws of 20 plus air yards. And certainly some of that involves the receivers. The attempt rate isn't high in terms of 20 plus air yard throws, but he does make the most of them. And that certainly matters in terms of his overall decision making. And especially if he's not going deep a lot right now. Maybe he hasn't had to, but against Michigan and Indiana, that may need to be part of the playbook. So we might see it a great deal more. And also, by the way, in terms of plays when he's under pressure, he has the highest completion percentage among the Heisman qualifiers at 64.7%.
Yeah, and I was just saying, I think he probably has less of those highlight reel style plays because he hasn't needed to based on game script, but he certainly can throw it deep. And yeah, it's really all about avoiding mistakes. That's what quarterbacking is at that level. He's only thrown 4 interceptions, only taken 6 sacks compared to 15 for Mendoza. Yeah, Mendoza's more mobile. He has more rushing yards. He's more of a threat in the scramble and design run game, but also that can harm you. You hold on to the ball too long, so you can make something happen. Whereas kid like Sane just gets rid of the ball when he knows he needs to. So yeah, I mean, really, it's all about staying on schedule. Avoid mistakes as a quarterback, low interceptions, low sacks. That's what won Josh MVP last year at the pro level and took only 14 sacks and 6 picks in a 17-game season, which is pretty remarkable. So if you're a quarterback and you can do that. You don't need necessarily the break it 5 tackles on the scramble or throw the ball 70 yards on a rope. Keep the offense moving. That's what the quarterback has always been about. That's what he does at an elite level.
Absolutely, he does. Let's move on now to Vanderbilt's Diego Pavia, maybe the best dual threat quarterback in this mix. Top 20 in rush attempts, PFF grade, you name it, in terms of keeping things on the ground and using his legs. Narrative is easy for him. Massive upsets throughout his career while at Vanderbilt. Can't lead the school to the SEC championship this season, but Vandy can still make the playoff with some help, which is just wild to think about that possibility. But again, it goes back to just how easy it is to create a narrative for him. Not a great pro prospect, which could impact the way voters think about how good of a quarterback he really is. But again, he could very well be a Heisman finalist. And in terms of getting that label, why should we believe that there's something about this year that makes him special beyond just, say, giving him like a Lifetime Achievement Award because of how much he's meant to college football?
Yeah, I think he's really similar to Mendoza in a lot of ways in terms of that competitiveness and really not just that, but helping a program that is not a football powerhouse historically by any means. He really gets to that level. I went to Penn and worked at UCLA for a bit, so I definitely know the challenges of building a football powerhouse at those really academic oriented schools. And where Vanderbilt has gone these past few years is pretty incredible. And Clark Lee's done a hell of a job, and Pavia has a face of that on the field. And yeah, you get very similar to Mendoza, just a guy who's like pretty mobile, never quits on a play. Just always you feel like you're in the game when he's back there. And still is efficient too. He's also completing over 70% of his passes, also over 9 yards per pass attempt, plus doing a great job on the ground. So he does a lot of things well, and who knows what he'll get drafted. Obviously, I think his arm's not quite as strong as Mendoza's. I think his age will hurt him a bit in the draft process, but he's a competitor. Definitely, again, I don't know, I'm not in the locker room, but it seems like the ultimate kind of teammate you want. So he's done a lot of stuff right, and he'll earn that final spot if and when he gets one.
Yeah, at last check, Pavia, highest big-time throw rate among true Heisman contenders at 6.6% per PFF. Also gives them the highest passing grade when blitzed. And so when defenses don't have too many answers for him because he can do so many different things, you got to respect that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a nightmare for any defensive coaches. The quarterback can do multiple things back there. We saw some of that last year at the high school level. It's the same in pro, same in college. You don't want to be going against somebody that versatile. It can be a nightmare for game planning.
Let's stay in the SEC, and Texas A&M's Marcel Reed still in contention, even though he's running out of time, say, generating pub. Certainly a game against Texas, that could help his cause. The SEC championship game, if he beats the Longhorns, can help the cause, keeping that campaign still alive. His Heisman moment, definitely that epic comeback against South Carolina. At the same time, when you think about epic comebacks, that means that you were in a massive hole to begin with in that contest. And so maybe some voters are looking at that with a grain of salt. But still, though, what do you like about Marcel Reed?
Yeah, I mean, for starters, I think it's cool that Texas and Texas A&M are fighting the same conference again. It's the wrong conference, but at least they're in the same one. But yeah, I think with Reed, he's probably not quite as sheerly efficient as the other guys we've mentioned. His completion percentage is more in 61-ish range. The other guys are all above 70, but he's still, really can make the big play happen. A lot of explosive plays that offense has gotten. He can do it on the ground and in the air as well. So they're really, big play, fun to watch. Kind of as you mentioned, that Heisman moment maybe isn't really that warranted because you go down 30-3 at halftime. You did something wrong, but it still was obviously cool to see that happen. I think, and I don't know the last time Texas A&M was 11-0. It's got to be a long time ago, if ever.
Mm-hmm.
So again, it's really cool to see these guys taking programs that have not historically been, national championship winners to levels they're contending for that. It's always cool to see culture shifting at a school, and he's responsible for that the same way we've talked about Mendoza and Pavia.
Yeah, I'm curious what you think about this philosophy that I have about trying to predict Heisman winners. Where I do feel like that if you're trying to figure out if a quarterback is respected versus, say, voters liking the quarterback, but it's because of the system that he's in. I wonder if one of the things that you can point to involves, say, play action passing, where if you're doing it a lot, like Jackson Dart did at Ole Miss for a long time, like he had, really gaudy numbers, but he was never really in the Heisman conversation that seriously compared with a lot of the other guys who got to New York and wound up winning it. And I think one of the reasons was just a lot of play action passing where it's that system that you can point to versus something that he was able to do. And when it comes to Marcel Reed, it's something where he's kind of in the middle of the pack in play action passing, but when those plays are called, he does throw it deep. I believe it's, more than 11 yards per attempt off play action passes. And to me, when you're going deep, that is a sign that it's not just the system he's around, but that he's making the most of that. And yeah, the receivers for A&M are very solid, but when he's got good touch on that ball, that can be an explosive offense, and it has a lot to do with the quarterback.
I think not just the scheme itself, but I think something that is in the back of voters' minds, I don't think it necessarily should be, is sort of for other college quarterbacks to play at this school and or play under this coach, do they succeed in the pros? And if they don't, then that means maybe the coach is just a genius who's making them look better than they are. Think about all those Texas Tech quarterbacks who put up absurd numbers, Graham Harrell and Mahomes, like, their numbers alone were Heisman worthy, but they got this negative stereotype like, oh, Texas Tech quarterbacks are never good in the NFL. It's all the system. It's all Mike Leach or Cliff Kingsbury, whoever was there at that time. And, they never really got a chance to win that award just because of the stereotype going around about what those quarterbacks turned into in the pros. So I think that's something that, again, like you said with Lane Kiffin, he's a scheme genius. He probably makes quarterbacks look even better than they are just because he's such a good play caller and really an offensive savant. It's why he's been so good at different schools. So yeah, I think that is a factor that, whether justified or not, is in voters' minds. But the bottom line is you got to watch the games. Like, the game ain't playing like Excel, like I said in our first chat. So no matter, what you see online, like high play action rate, you still got to watch the throws, see is he making throws that the average quarterback cannot make. You got to give some credit for that if they do that. And I think Reed has done that a lot this year. He's definitely deserves credit for what he's done.
Absolutely. And the fact that even in this era of NILs, where especially in the SEC, it's something where the top isn't as good as it used to be, and the middle class and, say, the bottom feeders, they're better than they used to be. Like, it is a far more well-rounded conference as far as I'm concerned than it has been in seasons past. And the fact that Texas A&M, regardless of who they've played with in conference, the fact that they are still undefeated to this point, and could very well beat Texas and then be 12-0 going to the SEC championship game, at some point the quarterback for that offense has to be respected.
Yeah, no, he's not doing it against an easy schedule, as you mentioned, and it's not like they're winning every game 14-7 or 14-10. Like, they're putting up big points against good opponents, and you give some credit to coaching for sure. I mean, Mike Elko is Penn alum, so I got to shout out him. That's cool. But yeah, the quarterback's doing some great things too. You got to show respect for that.
We got to mention a running back who's very much in this Heisman mix. And when you first think of Notre Dame's Jeremiah Love, it's certainly the explosives. Notre Dame possesses a good run blocking offensive line, but how Love has carved up the likes of USC, Purdue, and Syracuse this year, at a minimum, he should get an invite to New York. What makes him stand out versus, say, other elite running backs that have been part of the Heisman conversation over the last few years?
And I saw this weird stat, and you probably saw it too, like every year ending in 5 for the past, I think, 80 years, a running back has won, which is pretty weird coincidence. But yeah, I think it's probably like just too good of a quarterback year for him to really have a shot at winning, unless both Say and Mendoza really fall apart late because their stats are absurd, as we've already talked about. But with Lovey, I think it's just the sheer big playability, the explosiveness. you'll see people on Twitter comparing him to Reggie Bush with certain runs. And like that's obviously very high praise, but he really can make people miss and create explosives in an awesome to watch way. I mean, we all remember that huge run in the playoffs last year, that first game. I think it was a 96, 98-yard run, something like that, where he just, changed that game in the blink of an eye. So he's super explosive, accelerates well. He's fast, he's agile, he can make you miss. He's definitely fun to watch.
And he's someone, as you mentioned, like we talked about him a lot last year in terms of that playoff run. Could he sustain it through this regular season? And the answer is a resounding yes. So the fact that voters have known about him for quite some time certainly helps his cause. Sometimes voters like to be surprised a little bit, try and find that unknown story, and then all of a sudden that breakout player. But with Love, maybe it's a little bit different. But at some point, you still have to go, okay, Notre Dame is certainly one of the best teams in the country, and one of the reasons is because of Love. Yet at the same time, I think it's important to mention with him that Notre Dame's passing attack is also fantastic. CJ Carr's presence, kind of this chicken or the egg thing when it comes to who's helping whom more. Is it Love's presence? Is it that backfield? Jadarian Prince also being a part of that. Is that opening up the passing game? Or the fact that you've got a more than competent quarterback in CJ Carr? Maybe that's also loosening things up so that the running backs can also shine. How do you see that?
Yeah, I think it's a constant debate we have at every level of football. It's like who should get the credit, but bottom line, there's 11 people on the field. They all got to do their jobs. Not to mention, the coaches designing plays and calling the plays. And like I said, I think people talk about the Rams. It's like, oh, is Stafford that's good, or is McVay just genius? And is Puka Nacua helping him out? Like, well, they're all helping each other out. It's hard to actually divide the credit in an actually accurate way, just because we're on the outside. We don't know what the intent of a play was, who really did their job exceptionally on a given play. We weren't there when they were drawing the play up. So yeah, it's obviously a little bit of everything. I think Carr has probably been better than people thought he was going to be. He's averaging also roughly 9.5 yards per pass attempt, only 6 interceptions, which for a young QB, definitely not bad. And yeah, I mean, they're obviously good up front as they always are. But yeah, so everybody helps a little bit. But I think, Love is probably the engine that makes that offense run more than anybody else's. But yeah, everybody helps. It's as a Bills say, everybody eats. I think you got to 11 people on the field, they all do their jobs for the offense to succeed. And I think Notre Dame's one of the good teams because they compete in multiple ways.
Is there anyone else who you will be watching carefully to see if they can make a move?
Yeah, got to shout out Byron Brown, man. That's my guy. He's not going to win the award. I mean, I think it'd be cool if he got some votes at least. He probably won't quite be a finalist, but he's putting up some special numbers there. That offense at USF is pretty incredible. He's definitely on a good pace to become a 3,000, 1,000 guy, 3,000 passing yards, 1,000 rushing yards. And if he does that, that's pretty rare territory. That's see some elite names, Deshaun Watson, Johnny Manziel, Vince Young, Jalen Hurts, Kyler Murray, Jaden Daniels. Like those are the kind of guys who put those numbers up at the FBS level. And I know USF's in the AAC, not necessarily one of the power conferences, and they're out of the playoff race realistically, which hurts his candidacy, but he's really doing some special things. He's fun to watch. I don't know if he's going to go declare this year or if he'll transfer somewhere else or he'll stick it out one more year at USF because he's got another year of eligibility, but he's fun to watch, man. Those design runs, he just doesn't go down. I think he's a better passer than people give him credit for, too. So I'd love to see him get a little bit of love. Again, he's not going to win the award, but he gets a few, for the 5th place votes. That'd be fun to see because he's really balling out and maybe does get the attention that some of these power conference guys are getting.
I'm going to tiptoe around asking you for a prediction who's going to win this award. And I think the best way to phrase it is, how do you kind of see all of this playing out in terms of those who really will be vying for those finalist spots?
Ultimately, I think the Vegas odds are what they are for a reason. Like, it feels like it's going to likely be Sayan or Mendoza, and likely whoever wins that game if they do play each other. But no, it's a good group. And I think a lot of quarterbacks putting up some pretty incredible numbers. All these guys throwing for nearly 10 yards per attempt, completing 70+% of their passes. And obviously, Love among the running backs is leader of that pack. He's doing some pretty good things. So yeah, it's going to be a very deserving group of finalists. It's going to be fun to see how it plays out. But I certainly think it's going to end up being one of those two quarterbacks at the top of the leaderboard, unless they both really have bad showings these last two games.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because the thing that I wrote about a couple of days ago on my Substack is this notion that, okay, if you're going up against a really good defense and Michigan, certainly no slouch at all, does that mean that Sayan may look a little bit more pedestrian? And the truth is the best quarterbacks, the true Heisman winners, they rise to the occasion. They can handle just about any challenge thrown their way, and especially if we're talking about Ohio State that couldn't beat Michigan, like that narrative exists. If Sands able to go out there and be fantastic, certainly that does change the landscape of this Heisman race. And so, even though we have 2 Saturdays left, there's still a lot that can be up for grabs.
Yeah, things can change quickly. And, again, like kind of as I alluded to earlier, I don't think you necessarily need that like Heisman moment. I think if you dominate all year, you should deserve credit for that. But this is a great opportunity for Sane to get that moment because, the game's lost a little bit of luster because of the playoff. Now Ohio State can lose that game and still get a spot, which I think shouldn't be the case. But it's still, again, as we all know, they haven't won that game in 4 straight years, and that game still means so much to the people at those schools. So, yeah, if you can win that game and play well while doing it, that really is as good of a moment you can ask for.
Cole, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Definitely. Thanks for having me.